Life for most people is spent somewhere other than where they actually are. The mind travels constantly into memories and expectations. Rarely does a person fully meet the moment they are living. This is where the idea of the power of now becomes important. It is not a philosophy meant only for reflection. It is a direct invitation to experience life without unnecessary mental distance. The present moment is the only space where anything real ever happens. Everything else exists as thought. Memory is thought. Imagination is thought. Worry is thought. Yet people often confuse thought with reality itself. When attention is fully absorbed in what is happening right now, something shifts. There is less inner conflict, less mental resistance, more clarity in action. This does not mean problems disappear. It means the experience of problems changes. They become situations to respond to, rather than stories to suffer through. The power of now is not about escaping life. It is about entering it fully. Most stress is not created by situations themselves. It is created by the mind resisting those situations. When resistance drops, awareness increases. And in awareness, there is stability, even in difficult conditions. This introduction is not asking you to believe anything. It is inviting you to observe your own experience, to notice where your attention is living. Because whatever holds your attention shapes your inner world. If your attention is always elsewhere, your life feels divided. If your attention returns to the present, life becomes direct. The journey of understanding begins here, not in theory, but in noticing what is actually happening within you in this moment. Chapter 1. The illusion of time. Human beings live with a deep assumption that time is something they are moving through, as if it is a river carrying them forward. This assumption feels natural, but it creates a hidden distortion in how life is experienced. The mind divides life into three parts: what happened before, what is happening now, what will happen later. Out of these three, only one is real in a direct and living sense: the present moment. The past is only memory. The future is only imagination, projected by thought. Neither exists as something you can actually touch or experience directly. Yet most emotional suffering does not come from what is happening now. It comes from mental movement into what is not here. A person remembers something painful and feels it again. Even though the event is gone, the emotional reaction returns. The body responds as if it is happening again. This is how the past continues to live inside the present. In the same way, the mind creates images of future danger or failure. The body reacts with stress, even though nothing is occurring yet. This is how the future begins to control the present experience. Time becomes psychological rather than real. It becomes a mental environment where people live instead of the actual moment they are in. When attention is trapped in this mental time field, life feels heavy and fragmented. There is always something missing or something threatening ahead. This creates a subtle but constant dissatisfaction. Even when life is objectively fine, the mind says it is not enough, because it is comparing the present with a different time that does not exist. The illusion of time is not that clocks are unreal. It is that psychological time is mistaken for reality. The body always exists in the present. Breathing happens now. Sensation happens now. Perception happens now. But the mind keeps leaving this simplicity. When a person begins to notice this movement, something important becomes visible. Thought is not the same as reality. You can observe a thought about the past. You can observe a thought about the future. And in both cases, you remain here in the present watching them. That awareness is the beginning of freedom from psychological time. Example 1. A person recalls a mistake they made years ago. They feel embarrassment as if it is happening again. Their mind is not in the past event itself, but in a recreated version of it in the present. When they notice this, they realize the suffering is not caused by the event, but by the present thinking of it. Example 2. A person is waiting for an important result. They imagine failure and success repeatedly. Their emotional state rises and falls based on imagined outcomes. But nothing has changed in reality yet. When they return attention to what is actually happening around them, the intensity of fear reduces. The illusion of time dissolves gradually when attention is brought back to direct experience, not by rejecting memory or planning, but by recognizing that life is always unfolding now. The past has already ended. The future, it only becomes the present when it happens. Everything you will ever experience will only occur in this moment. When this is clearly seen, a shift begins. Life stops being lived as a mental story stretched across time, and starts being experienced as a living presence unfolding moment by moment. The mind is a tool, not a master. The human mind is one of the most powerful instruments a person has. It can analyze, solve, create, and imagine possibilities that do not yet exist. It allows planning, learning, and survival in a complex world. But there is a deeper truth that is often missed. The mind was meant to be used, not to control the entire experience of being alive. In many people, the mind becomes the center of identity. Thoughts are no longer seen as tools. They are mistaken for truth itself. When this happens, a person stops observing thoughts and starts becoming them. A single thought appears and immediately shapes emotion. That emotion then drives reaction, and reaction becomes behavior. Without awareness, a full cycle is completed in seconds. Most inner suffering does not come from life itself. It comes from unobserved thinking patterns repeating without interruption. The mind constantly generates commentary. It judges what is good. It compares what is better or worse. It predicts what might happen next. It replays what already happened. This continuous activity creates the feeling of noise inside. When there is no awareness of this process, a person believes they are the voice in their head. But when awareness develops, something important is discovered. There is the thought, and there is the one who is aware of the thought. These are not the same. The moment you notice a thought, you are already separate from it. That separation is the beginning of freedom. The mind is not the enemy. It is simply an overactive tool when left unchecked. A useful tool responds when needed. A controlling mind reacts even when nothing is required. Learning to observe the mind does not mean stopping it. It means changing your relationship with it. You no longer believe every thought. You no longer follow every mental story. You begin to see patterns instead of being trapped inside them. This creates space between awareness and thinking. And in that space, clarity becomes possible. Example 1. A person receives a negative comment about their work. The mind immediately produces thoughts like "I am not good enough" or "I always fail." If they identify with these thoughts, they feel emotional collapse. If instead they observe the thoughts, they realize these are reactions, not facts. This allows them to respond calmly and improve where needed. Example 2. A person is trying to make an important decision. Their mind generates endless arguments for both sides. This creates confusion and stress. If they step back and observe the thinking process, they notice that clarity comes only when in that stillness, a simpler and more grounded choice becomes visible. The mind is most useful when it is aligned with the present moment, when it is solving a real situation here and now. But when it drifts into endless interpretation, it loses its clarity. Awareness brings it back. You begin to notice, this is a thought, this is a reaction, this is a memory, this is imagination. And slowly identification weakens. You are no longer inside the mind. You are the awareness in which the mind appears. This shift does not remove thinking from life. It places thinking in its proper position, a servant rather than a master. And in that simple change, a quieter and more conscious way of living begins to emerge. Chapter 3: Acceptance of what is. There is a silent resistance that operates in most human experience. It is not always visible on the surface, but it shapes emotional life in a powerful way. This resistance is the refusal to fully accept the present moment as it is. People often believe their suffering comes from external events, but more precisely, it comes from the inner disagreement with what is already happening. When reality is met with resistance, the mind creates an internal conflict. One part of experience says this is happening. Another part says this should not be happening. This split creates tension, and that tension becomes suffering. Acceptance is not approval. It is not agreement with everything that occurs. It is the recognition that what is happening is already happening. In that recognition, something important changes. Energy that was used to resist becomes available again. When resistance drops, clarity increases, because attention is no longer divided between what is and what should not be. Many people misunderstand acceptance as weakness or passivity, but in reality, acceptance is the foundation of intelligent action. You cannot respond clearly to a situation you are still mentally fighting, because part of your attention is stuck in denial. When you accept reality first, you see it more clearly, and only then can effective action take place. The present moment is always simple in itself. It is the mind that complicates it through rejection and comparison. Suffering often begins when the mind says this should be different, or this is unfair, or this must not be happening. These thoughts do not change reality. They only add emotional weight to it. Acceptance breaks this cycle by removing inner opposition. Example 1. A person is stuck in a long traffic jam. They feel anger, frustration, and impatience. Because mentally they believe they should already be somewhere else. The traffic itself is neutral, but resistance turns it into suffering. When they accept that they are here for now, the emotional tension reduces, and they can use the time differently, such as resting or observing their surroundings. Example 2. A person receives news that a plan has failed. Their immediate reaction is disappointment and internal rejection of the outcome. They replay what could have been done differently. This creates mental suffering that extends the event far beyond its actual moment. When acceptance enters, they stop fighting the fact of what has already happened and begin to focus on the next possible step. Acceptance does not remove challenges from life, but it removes unnecessary inner struggle about those challenges. There is a difference between problem solving and psychological resistance. Problem solving looks at what can be done. Resistance argues with what already is. Only one of these leads forward movement. When acceptance becomes a habit, life feels less like a battle and more like a continuous flow of situations that can be met directly. Even difficult moments become, in acceptance, there is a quiet strength, a stability that does not depend on conditions being perfect. And from that stability, action becomes more precise, more grounded, and more aligned with reality as it is unfolding now. Chapter 4. The freedom of presence. Presence is the state where attention is no longer divided between mental stories and what is actually happening right now. It is simple in essence, yet difficult for most people to remain in for long periods because the mind is constantly pulling awareness away. One of the deepest habits of human consciousness is distraction. Not only external distraction, but internal distraction. A person may be sitting in silence, yet completely lost in thinking. So even silence does not guarantee presence. Presence begins when attention returns to direct experience. What you can see, hear, feel, and sense in this moment. There is a difference between thinking about life and actually experiencing life. Most people spend more time thinking about living than living itself. When presence increases, something subtle changes. Life feels more vivid and immediate. Ordinary moments gain clarity. And there is a sense of grounded awareness that does not depend on external conditions. Presence is not a special state that must be created. It is what remains when unnecessary thinking is reduced. The present moment does not require interpretation to exist. It is already complete as it is, but the mind often refuses simplicity. It tries to label, evaluate, and compare everything. This creates distance between the person and their experience. When that distance reduces, there is a sense of coming back. Presence is not about forcing attention. It is about noticing where attention already is and gently returning it. Over time, this becomes a natural habit of awareness. Example 1. A person is walking outdoors while constantly thinking about future tasks. They barely notice the environment around them. Their body is present, but their mind is elsewhere. When they suddenly notice the sky, the air, and their steps, they feel a shift. The walk becomes calm and more real, simply because attention returned to the present moment. Example 2. During a conversation, one person is physically listening, but mentally preparing their response. They miss the actual meaning of what is being said. When they become aware of this habit, they begin to listen fully without planning their reply in advance. The conversation becomes deeper and more connected because presence replaces mental distraction. Presence also changes the quality of action. When you are fully present, your response to situations becomes more accurate. Because you are not reacting from memory or imagination. You are responding to what is actually here. Many mistakes in life come from acting while mentally absent. Not from lack of ability, but from lack of attention. Presence restores alignment between awareness and action. There is also a quiet peace that comes with presence. Not because life becomes perfect, but because inner resistance reduces. You are no longer constantly pulled into past regrets or future worries. You are meeting life directly as it unfolds. This does not mean thoughts disappear. It means thoughts no longer dominate your entire experience. They come and go while awareness remains steady in the background. With practice, presence becomes more stable, not as a permanent state, but as a returning point. Again and again, attention comes back to now. And in that return, life becomes clearer, simpler, and more grounded in what is real, rather than what is imagined. Chapter 5. The pain created by the mind. Pain is a natural part of human life. It comes through physical experience, emotional loss, and difficult circumstances. This kind of pain is unavoidable, but there is another form of suffering that is not strictly caused by events themselves. It is created and extended by the mind. This is mental or psychological pain, and it often lasts far longer than the actual situation that triggered it. The mind has a tendency to resist what has already happened, and in that resistance, it creates additional layers of suffering. A single event occurs, but the mind replays it, repeatedly adds interpretation, and builds stories around it. What might have been a short moment of discomfort becomes a long internal experience of suffering. This is because the mind does not only record reality, it also comments on it continuously. It says this should not have happened, or I cannot believe this happened, or this means something terrible about me or my future. These thoughts are not the event itself. They are reactions to the event. And when a person identifies with these reactions, they experience emotional pain again and again. The body lives in the present moment, but the mind can keep re-entering the past or projecting into the future. And every return feels real to the nervous system. This is how psychological pain is sustained. When awareness enters this process, something important becomes visible. There is the original situation, and there is the mental interpretation of it. They are not the same. Often the interpretation is where most of the suffering lives. The present moment itself is always neutral in its raw form. It becomes heavy only when the mind resists it or labels it. Letting go of mental resistance does not erase the event, but it stops the unnecessary repetition of suffering. Example 1. A person goes through a breakup. The actual event is one moment of separation, but the mind continues to replay memories, compare past moments, and imagine loss repeatedly. This mental replay creates ongoing emotional pain long after the relationship has ended. When the person begins to observe their thoughts, instead of believing them fully, the intensity of suffering slowly reduces because the event is no longer being constantly recreated in the mind. Example 2. A person makes a serious mistake at work. The mistake itself has already happened and cannot be changed. But the mind keeps saying, I am a failure, or I ruined everything. This creates shame and anxiety that continues beyond the situation. When awareness is applied, they begin to see that these thoughts are judgments, not reality itself. This recognition weakens the emotional hold of the experience and allows them to focus on correction instead of self-punishment. The key difference is this. Pain happens in life, but suffering is often added by the mind after the fact. When you are fully present, the mind loses the power to endlessly extend the pain. This does not mean ignoring responsibility or avoiding learning from mistakes. It means stopping the unnecessary mental repetition that turns experience into suffering. There is a moment where awareness simply observes. This happened, it is over now. What is needed now? In that space, mental noise reduces. And when mental noise reduces, the weight of suffering also reduces. Life still contains challenges, but it is no longer burdened by constant internal resistance. This is where freedom begins. Not from changing everything outside, but from no longer adding extra suffering inside the mind. In presence, pain is acknowledged, but suffering is not multiplied unnecessarily. And in that distinction, a more peaceful way of living becomes possible. Chapter 6. Living Beyond Identification. Human beings build a sense of self from thoughts, memories, roles, and labels. This sense of self feels stable, but it is actually constructed in the mind. People say, I am my name, I am my past, I am my achievements, I am my failures. These statements feel true because they are repeated often. But in reality, they are mental descriptions, not direct experience. Identification happens when a person becomes fully merged with a thought about themselves. Instead of seeing a thought, they become it. If a thought says, I am not good enough, the person feels it as their identity. If a thought says, I will fail, they feel it as truth about their existence. In this state, there is no space between awareness and thought. Everything becomes personal and heavy. Living beyond identification means recognizing that thoughts are events in the mind. You are the awareness in which these thoughts appear. When this is seen clearly, something begins to loosen inside. The grip of self-judgment weakens, the urgency of mental stories reduces, and life becomes less emotionally reactive. You are still able to think, but you are no longer trapped inside thinking. This does not remove personality or memory. It simply removes over-identification with them. A thought can still appear, but it no longer defines your entire reality. Example 1. A person makes a mistake during a presentation. Immediately a thought arises, I am incompetent. If they believe this thought completely, their confidence collapses and their behavior becomes fearful. If instead, they observe the thought, they can see it as a temporary mental reaction and continue speaking with awareness. Example 2. A person sees someone else succeed in life. A thought arises, I am behind everyone. If they identify with this thought, they feel inferior and discouraged. If they observe it, they realize it is only comparison created by the mind and not an absolute truth. They can then return focus to their own path without emotional distortion. When identification weakens, a new kind of inner freedom appears. Situations still happen, thoughts still arise, but they no longer define your entire state of being. There is space between awareness and mental content. In that space, there is clarity, because reactions are no longer automatic. You begin to respond instead of react. Living beyond identification does not mean becoming detached from life. It means engaging with life without being mentally consumed by it. You still care. You still act. You still participate. But you are no longer lost in the mental narration of everything. A quiet observation becomes possible. This is a thought arising. This is an emotion moving through. This is a situation unfolding, and in that observation, there is stability. The sense of self becomes lighter, less rigid, less dependent on mental labels. You are not reduced by this. You are expanded into awareness itself. Life becomes less about defending an identity, and more about experiencing reality directly, as it is unfolding now. Chapter 7, Stillness as Inner Strength. Stillness is often misunderstood. In reality, it is one of the deepest forms of inner strength. Most people associate strength with constant movement and constant thinking. They believe progress requires mental noise and continuous effort. But inner stillness is not the absence of action. It is the absence of inner disturbance while action happens. Stillness means the mind is not compulsively reacting to every situation. It is able to remain centered even when external conditions change. Without stillness, the mind becomes reactive. It jumps from one thought to another, one emotion to another, one concern to another. This creates inner instability, even when life appears stable on the outside. Stillness begins when attention stops being fully captured by mental activity. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer pull the entire sense of self into them. There is a space of awareness that remains steady beneath the movement of thoughts. That space is stillness. Stillness is not something you create through force. It is what is revealed when unnecessary mental activity slows down. When stillness is present, perception becomes clearer, because you are not constantly interpreting reality through noise. You begin to see situations as they are, rather than as the mind describes them. This leads to wiser action, because action is not driven by emotional reaction, but by clarity. Example 1. A person is in a heated argument. Normally, the mind reacts immediately with anger and defense. Words become sharp and emotional escalation increases. But if stillness is present, the person can pause internally. They may still speak, but their response is not controlled by rage. This creates space for a more balanced outcome. A person is facing a major life decision. The mind generates anxiety and multiple conflicting thoughts. Without stillness, they feel overwhelmed and confused. But when they settle into inner quiet, they can observe the situation without mental pressure. From that stillness, a simpler and more grounded direction becomes visible. Stillness also changes the relationship with time. When the mind is noisy, time feels rushed and heavy. There is always something urgent or unfinished. In stillness, time feels less oppressive, because attention is not constantly pulled into future worries or past regrets. There is only the present moment unfolding. Stillness also strengthens awareness. You begin to notice subtle thoughts before they turn into strong reactions. You become aware of emotional shifts as they arise. This awareness creates choice instead of automatic reaction. Over time, stillness becomes a natural background of consciousness. Not something forced, but something recognized and returned to. Life does not become silent or empty, but the inner experience becomes less chaotic. Even in activity, there is a center of calmness. You are no longer completely carried away by external events or internal stories. Instead, you remain grounded in awareness while life moves through its natural changes. Stillness is not withdrawal from life. It is deeper participation in life without inner disturbance. And in that stillness, a different kind of strength emerges. Not the strength of control, but the strength of presence that does not collapse under pressure. Chapter 8. The present moment as the only reality. Most human suffering is built on a simple misunderstanding. The belief that life is happening somewhere other than now. People wait for life to begin later, after success arrives, after problems are solved, after circumstances improve. But life never arrives in the future as a finished state. It only ever appears as this moment. The present moment is not a part of life. It is the only place where life actually exists. Everything else is mental construction. The past exists only as memory happening now in the mind. The future exists only as imagination happening now in the mind. Both are experienced in the present, not outside of it. This means the entire content of human experience always takes place here. When this is not understood, the mind continuously escapes reality. It either clings to what is gone or reaches toward what is not yet here. This creates a sense of incompleteness, as if something essential is missing from the current moment. But the missing feeling is not caused by the moment itself. It is created by comparison with mental projections. When attention returns fully to now, the illusion of lack begins to dissolve. The present moment does not need improvement to be real. It already contains everything that is actually happening. Breathing is happening. Sensing is happening. Perceiving is happening. Thinking is happening. All of this is already complete in its unfolding. The mind, however, tends to label the present as insufficient, because it measures it against imagined standards. This constant comparison removes people from direct experience. When comparison stops even briefly, there is a shift. The ordinary becomes more vivid. Simple things regain depth. Attention becomes more stable. Example 1. A person is eating a meal while thinking about future responsibilities. They are physically eating, but mentally elsewhere. The experience feels rushed and unsatisfying. When they bring full attention to the act of eating, the taste, texture, and moment become clear and grounded. The experience becomes richer, not because the food changed, but because attention returned to the present. Example 2. A person is working while constantly thinking about future achievements. This creates pressure and dissatisfaction in the present task. When they stop projecting into the future and focus only on the current action, the work becomes more efficient and less stressful, because attention is no longer divided between now and imagined outcomes. The present moment is always available. It cannot be escaped, and it cannot be postponed. Even trying to leave it happens within it. This is why awareness of now is so powerful. It brings attention back to what is actually real, rather than what is mentally constructed. When this recognition deepens, a quiet clarity emerges. Life is not waiting to begin later. It is already happening in this moment. And when that is fully seen, the urgency of chasing mental time dissolves. What remains is direct experience. Simple, immediate, through awareness. Fear is one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior. It influences decisions, relationships, and entire life paths without being fully noticed. At its core, fear is not always about what is actually happening. It is often about what the mind imagines. This means fear is usually connected to the future. A future that is not real yet, but is being experienced in the present through thought. When a fearful thought arises, the body reacts as if the imagined situation is real. Heartbeat increases, tension appears, and attention narrows. But nothing has actually occurred in reality yet. This reveals an important truth. Fear is often a mental projection experienced in the present moment. The present moment itself does not contain fear. Fear appears when the mind moves away from what is and enters what might be. When awareness returns to the present, the intensity of fear begins to weaken. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means the mental exaggeration of those challenges reduces. Fear grows in absence of clarity, when attention is scattered between possibilities and interpretations. But when attention is grounded in what is actually happening, now fear loses its fuel. Awareness does not fight fear. It simply observes it. And in that observation, fear begins to lose its grip. Because fear depends on identification with thought. When thought is seen clearly, as thought, it loses authority. Example 1. A person is preparing for an important exam. They begin imagining failure and rejection. These thoughts create anxiety even before the exam happens. Their body reacts to something that is not real yet. When they become aware of this pattern, they bring attention back to their current study material and breathing. The fear reduces because attention is no longer feeding imagined outcomes. A person hears a sudden loud sound at night. The immediate reaction is fear because the mind assumes danger. But after a moment of awareness, they realize there is no actual threat present. The fear quickly dissolves once reality is seen clearly. Fear often survives through repetition of thought. The mind keeps returning to the same imagined scenario. Each repetition strengthens emotional intensity, but awareness interrupts repetition. When you see a thought as it arises, instead of following it, fear loses. This does not mean you become careless or unaware of real danger. It means you stop creating unnecessary psychological fear beyond actual situations. There is a difference between practical response and mental projection. Practical response deals with what is present. Mental projection deals with what is not. Only one of these is real in the current moment. As awareness deepens, fear becomes less dominant in daily life. Not because life becomes easier, but because the mind stops amplifying uncertainty into suffering. A quiet space begins to form inside, where fear can appear without taking control. In that space, there is stability, because attention remains rooted in what is real, rather than what is imagined. And in that stability, fear gradually loses its power to define experience. Chapter 10: Awakening to Conscious Living. Awakening in the context of the power of now does not mean becoming someone different. It means becoming aware of what is already happening within you without distortion. Most people live in a state of partial awareness. They are conscious enough to function, but not conscious enough to observe the inner process of thinking, feeling, and reacting. Because of this, life is experienced indirectly through mental interpretation rather than directly through presence. Awakening begins when a person starts to notice the difference between awareness and thought. Thoughts continue to arise. Emotions continue to move, but something new appears. The ability to observe all of it without being completely absorbed. This observation is not intellectual, it is experiential. You begin to realize that there is a stable presence underneath all changing mental activity. That presence does not age, does not panic, does not argue. It simply observes. This recognition is the beginning of conscious living. When awareness becomes stronger than identification with thought, a shift occurs in how life is experienced. Situations no longer define your entire state. They pass through awareness instead of becoming your identity. There is still emotion. But emotion is no longer total control. There is still thought. But thought is no longer absolute truth. Conscious living means responding from clarity rather than reacting from conditioning. Most human reactions are automatic, shaped by past experiences, habits, and unconscious patterns. Awakening interrupts this automation. It introduces space between stimulus and response. In that space, freedom exists. Freedom does not mean you control everything. It means you are no longer controlled internally by everything. Example 1. A person receives criticism from someone close. Normally, this triggers immediate emotional reaction and defensive thinking. But in a moment of awareness, they notice the reaction arising in the body and mind. Instead of acting immediately, they observe. This pause allows a more balanced response instead of emotional escalation. Example 2. A person is facing a stressful financial situation. The mind begins producing constant worrying scenarios. But they become aware of the fact that these are only thoughts, not current reality. They bring attention back to what can actually be done now. This shift reduces mental overwhelm and brings focus to practical action. Awakening does not remove challenges from life. It changes your relationship with those challenges. Problems still appear, but they are no longer multiplied by unconscious thinking. There is more space around experience, less inner contraction, more clarity in decision-making. Over time, this awareness becomes more natural, You do not need to force it. You simply begin to notice when you are lost in thought and gently return to presence. Again and again. That return is awakening in action. Conscious living is not a fun, and in that continuous return, life becomes simpler, clearer, and more deeply experienced than when filtered through constant mental noise. Conclusion: the living reality of now. The journey through the idea of the power of now is not about collecting information. It is about seeing reality more clearly than before. Everything explored points back to a simple truth. Life is only ever happening in this moment. The mind may travel endlessly through memory and imagination, but experience itself never leaves the present. When this is understood, even slightly life begins to feel different. Not because external conditions immediately change, but because attention stops being completely lost in mental time. The past loses its grip when it is seen as memory appearing now. The future loses its weight when it is seen as imagination appearing now. And in that direct experience, there is more clarity than complication, more simplicity than mental overload. The teachings of presence, acceptance, awareness, and stillness are not separate ideas. They are different ways of pointing back to the same reality. That reality is here, this moment, this awareness, this life unfolding right now. As attention returns again and again to the present moment, something subtle shifts in human experience. Suffering created by unnecessary mental resistance begins to reduce. Fear loses some of its authority, and thinking becomes a tool instead of a constant identity. Life does not become free of challenges, but it becomes less distorted by internal struggle about those challenges. You begin to see that much of what was carried inside was not the situation itself, but the mental and when awareness grows, those interpretations no longer fully control your state of being. There is more space inside, more quiet between thoughts, more stability beneath changing emotions. That space is not empty in a negative sense. It is alive with presence. In that presence, you are no longer only reacting to life. You are meeting it directly, not as an idea, but as reality itself. The power of now is ultimately not a concept to believe in. It is an invitation to return again and again to what is already here, because only here, in this moment, can life actually be lived. And in that recognition, something very simple becomes clear. Nothing is missing from this moment, except full attention to it. The end.
Kindly subscribe to my channel.